When I first stepped into the house, I wasn't sure what to expect. The ad had described it as a quiet place with a kind landlady, but those words felt vague, almost too simple to be true. I needed somewhere peaceful, somewhere to clear my head and focus, and this house, with its tall wooden doors and faint smell of jasmine drifting through the hallway, felt like a good place to start. She appeared at the doorway almost silently, as though the house had summoned her. My new landlady. She looked to be in her early 40s, her posture straight but not stiff, and her presence carried a kind of calm authority. There was nothing rushed about the way she moved, every step seemed deliberate, balanced. Her hair was pulled back neatly, with a few strands escaping near her temples, and her eyes, dark, steady, held mine just long enough to make me forget the polite greeting I had planned. "Welcome," she said, her voice even and warm, the kind that filled a space without needing to rise above it. I nodded, suddenly more aware of the sound of my own shoes against the polished floor. She offered me a small smile, the kind you give when you're cautious but not unkind, and gestured toward the living room. The house itself had character, soft lighting, shelves lined with books, a faint trace of fresh flowers in a vase by the window, but it was her presence that stood out most. She handed me the keys with a small tilt of her head. "This is your place too now," she said. And in that moment, something unexpected happened. Her fingers brushed mine as she dropped the keys into my palm. Just a second, barely long enough to notice, but I felt it. The warmth of her skin against mine, softer than I'd expected, deliberate in a way that seemed accidental. My heart caught in my chest, a quiet pause, before I forced a smile of thanks. She walked me through the rooms, pointing out little details, the kettle in the kitchen that heats slowly if you don't press the switch hard enough, the creak in the third stair that no one ever managed to fix. She spoke with ease, her voice carrying a mixture of pride and apology, like someone introducing a dear old friend who'd grown a little tired but was still beautiful in their own way. And all the while, I noticed the little things about her, the way she smoothed her sleeve absent-mindedly while she talked, the faint lines near her eyes that deepened when she smiled, the subtle grace that seemed woven into her every movement. I didn't know why I was paying such close attention. Maybe it was because the house was new, maybe because her presence felt strangely comforting. Or maybe it was because, for reasons I couldn't yet explain, I already sensed there was more to this woman than the word landlady could ever capture. As I settled into the room she had prepared, I caught myself replaying that brief touch of her hand on mine. It was nothing, really. But even then, I knew, it was the kind of nothing that lingers. It didn't take long for the house to start feeling less like a rental and more like a place that quietly looked after me. And if I was being honest, that feeling had less to do with the bricks and walls, and more to do with her. My landlady. She had a way of noticing things without ever making it obvious. On evenings when I returned later than usual, I'd sometimes find a cup of tea already waiting on the kitchen counter, steam curling into the air as though she had timed it to the minute. She never mentioned it, never asked how my day was in a way that demanded answers, but the small gesture spoke louder than words. One morning, I nearly burned my breakfast, toast blackened at the edges, the smoke curling up like a guilty secret. She appeared at the doorway, leaning against the frame with a laugh that surprised me. It was soft at first, then warmer, filling the kitchen with a sound that made the mistake almost worth it. I couldn't remember the last time someone had laughed like that around me. "You'll starve if you keep this up," she said, stepping forward to take the pan from me. Her hand brushed my wrist for the briefest second as she guided it away, the kind of touch that wasn't planned but carried a weight all the same. My skin felt oddly aware, as though her fingers had left an invisible trace. Sometimes, the care she showed was so ordinary that it unsettled me. Like the afternoon I was leaving for a meeting. I had rushed down the stairs, shirt half-tucked, collar uneven. She stopped me with a raised eyebrow. "Hold still," she said, reaching up. Her fingers worked gently at my collar, straightening it with slow, practiced movements. I could feel the warmth of her hands at my throat, close enough to notice the faint scent of her perfume, subtle, floral, almost hidden. My pulse betrayed me, thudding against my neck as she pressed the fabric flat. She stepped back when she was done, smiling slightly as though it had been nothing. For her, maybe it was. For me, it left an echo I carried the rest of the day. There were other little moments too. The way she'd remind me not to skip dinner, her voice firm but not unkind. Or the times she'd pause in the living room, glancing at the book I was reading, making a passing remark that somehow showed she had read it years ago. Each time, I found myself more aware of how much space she quietly occupied in my days. And yet, it wasn't just her kindness that caught me, it was the way she gave it. Without expectation, without trying to prove anything. Just gentle, steady gestures that slipped past my guard before I even realized it. I knew she was older, more experienced, carrying years of life I hadn't touched yet. But in those moments, her laughter in the kitchen, her fingers adjusting my collar, it didn't feel like a distance. It felt like a closeness neither of us had asked for, but both of us had started to notice. It was the kind of evening that makes silence feel heavier than usual. Rain tapped against the windows, steady and unrelenting, and the world outside seemed blurred into shadows and silver streaks. I had been sitting alone with a book, but the storm made concentration impossible. The house felt too big, too still, until I heard the soft shuffle of footsteps from the hall. She appeared, holding 2 cups of tea, the steam rising in gentle swirls. "The rain's not stopping anytime soon," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes holding mine for a fraction longer than necessary. Without asking, she set 1 cup in front of me and sat across the table. For a while, we just listened. The rain, the faint hum of the kettle cooling behind us, the creak of the chair as she settled. It wasn't uncomfortable. If anything, the quiet had a strange warmth to it, like the house itself was breathing with us. She broke it first. "Funny, isn't it? How a house can feel full when someone else is inside, and unbearably empty when it's not." Her words carried weight, though her smile tried to make them light. I looked at her, really looked this time. There was a softness in her face I hadn't seen before, something unguarded. I asked her what she meant. And that was when she began to tell me. Not all at once, not dramatically, but in pieces. About her marriage that had ended years ago. About the silence that had followed, filling these same walls with an ache that didn't go away just because time passed. She spoke carefully, as though each word had been kept hidden for too long, and now, finally, was allowed to step into the open. Her voice trembled slightly when she mentioned the loneliness, though she quickly masked it with a half-smile, tracing the rim of her teacup with 1 fingertip. I noticed that tiny detail, the way her hand moved when her voice faltered, like she needed something steady to hold on to. My eyes caught something else too, a faint scar near her wrist, barely visible in the dim light. I wanted to ask about it, but something inside me knew better. It wasn't my place yet. So I just listened. Really listened. The rain grew heavier, almost as if it was pressing her words deeper into the moment. I found myself leaning forward, elbows on the table, watching the way her lips curved around each thought, the way her gaze occasionally dropped to the table as though meeting my eyes for too long might expose too much. And in those minutes, the age difference between us, something I had quietly acknowledged since the day I moved in, didn't feel like a wall. If anything, it felt like a bridge. Her stories carried a depth I hadn't lived through, but my silence, my willingness to simply hear her, seemed to matter to her in a way I didn't expect. When she finally looked up again, her eyes softer now, she exhaled slowly. "You're easy to talk to," she admitted, almost like it surprised her. I didn't say much back. I didn't need to. The warmth in my chest said enough. That night, with the storm outside and the quiet honesty between us, I realized something was shifting. She wasn't just my landlady anymore. She was becoming something more. Dinner with her had become an unplanned ritual. Sometimes it was deliberate, she'd cook, I'd help wash up, but often it happened by accident, 2 separate meals merging into one at the same table. That night, though, something about it felt different. The dining room light was soft, golden, throwing gentle shadows across the table. She had cooked a simple meal, yet everything about the way she carried herself made it feel like more. She moved gracefully, placing dishes between us, brushing her sleeve back with a kind of natural elegance that needed no effort. We sat close, closer than we usually did. The chairs weren't far apart, but somehow it felt deliberate this time, like neither of us had bothered to keep a comfortable distance. The air carried the faintest scent of her perfume, floral, subtle, but impossible not to notice when she leaned forward to pour water into my glass. At one point, she reached across me for the salt. Her shoulder brushed against mine, just lightly, but the contact sent a ripple through me. It was such a small thing, accidental even, yet the warmth of her body lingered like it had been intentional. My fork paused halfway to my mouth. She noticed, I think. I saw the tiniest flicker of a smile at the corner of her lips before she looked away. The conversation was ordinary, about the weather, about a book she was reading, but underneath, there was something else. The silences stretched a little longer. The eye contact lingered just a moment too much. Even her laughter, when I teased her about burning rice once, carried a softness that seemed directed at me alone. I tried to focus on my food, but I kept noticing her. The curve of her wrist as she held her glass. The way her hair slipped loose from its tie and fell forward until she brushed it back behind her ear. The rhythm of her breathing when the room went quiet for a beat too long. Every detail felt magnified, like my senses had narrowed to her alone. When our eyes met again, it wasn't planned. I looked up just as she glanced over, and for a second, neither of us looked away. The space between us hummed with something unsaid. My chest tightened, not with fear but with a kind of anticipation I couldn't name. I wondered if she felt it too. The unspoken pull. The quiet magnetism neither of us dared to acknowledge out loud. Then, as if sensing the weight of the silence, she cleared her throat softly and reached for her glass. But her hand trembled slightly as she lifted it, and that tiny detail told me more than words ever could. The meal ended like any other, plates cleared, dishes rinsed, lights dimmed, but the air carried a charge I couldn't shake. Walking back to my room, I realized the line between us was blurring. Not crossed, not spoken of, but blurring in a way that felt inevitable. And deep down, I think we both knew it. It was late, the kind of late where even the house seemed tired. The rain had stopped hours ago, leaving the world outside heavy and quiet. I sat in the living room, bent over the glow of my laptop, trying to finish some work. The only sounds were the faint hum of the fan and the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. I didn't hear her footsteps at first. But then, from the corner of my eye, I saw her. She stood at the doorway, her hair loose now, framing her face in soft waves. She wasn't dressed for guests or company, just a simple cardigan draped over her shoulders, the kind of look that spoke more of comfort than appearance. And somehow, that simplicity made her presence even more striking. "You're still awake?" she asked quietly, her voice carrying the kind of gentleness people use when they don't want to disturb something fragile. "Couldn't sleep," I admitted, forcing a small smile. She walked closer, slowly, like she was deciding with each step whether she should stop or keep going. When she reached me, she didn't speak right away. She just stood there behind my chair, watching the screen for a moment, her silence soft but present. And then it happened. Without a word, her arms slipped gently around me from behind. I froze, not out of discomfort but because of how unexpected, how delicate the moment was. Her embrace wasn't firm, not possessive, it was tender, careful, as though she wasn't sure if she was allowed but couldn't stop herself. I felt the warmth of her chest press lightly against my back, her cheek resting near my shoulder. Her breathing was steady, and in the quiet of the room, I became painfully aware of every detail, the softness of her cardigan brushing my arm, the faint trace of her perfume, the way her hands lingered at my waist with a hesitant firmness, as if she needed me to know she was really there. My heartbeat thundered in my chest, so loud I wondered if she could feel it. And then she leaned closer, her lips near my ear. Her voice came as a whisper, almost fragile, but the weight of her words sank deep into me. You make this house feel alive again. For a moment, the world stopped. The clock, the laptop, the stillness of the night, all of it disappeared beneath the power of that whisper. It wasn't just gratitude. It wasn't casual. It was confession. A quiet, vulnerable truth she had carried for too long. I didn't move. I didn't dare. My chest tightened with a mixture of awe and something I was almost afraid to name. Because in that instant, I realized this wasn't about kindness anymore. This was about connection. About something neither of us had planned but both of us had been walking toward, slowly, without even realizing it. Her embrace lingered just a little longer before she pulled away. Not completely, her hand brushed against my shoulder as she stepped back, her touch reluctant to let go. I turned then, meeting her eyes. They shimmered with something raw, something that made my throat tighten. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The whisper was still echoing between us, louder than any words I could have found. That night, I knew everything had changed. When I turned to face her after that hug, the air felt different. Heavier, charged, like the whole room was holding its breath with us. She stood there, only a step away, her hand still brushing the back of the chair as though she wasn't ready to completely let go. Her eyes, they weren't guarded anymore. For weeks, I'd seen her carry herself with composure, a quiet dignity that rarely cracked. But now, the way she looked at me was different. Softer. Vulnerable, even. It was as if she had opened a door she'd been keeping locked for years, and suddenly I was standing on the threshold. I shouldn't have, she started, her voice low, almost apologetic. But the words faded before she could finish. She lowered her gaze, as though afraid to see how I'd react. I swallowed, my throat tight. My instinct was to ease her worry, to show her she hadn't done anything wrong. So, gently, I reached for her hand. It trembled slightly when my fingers touched hers, but she didn't pull away. Instead, I guided it slowly to my chest, pressing her palm flat against me so she could feel it, the rush of my heartbeat, pounding fast, betraying everything I hadn't said yet. Her breath caught, and her eyes lifted back to mine. You feel that? I whispered, my voice barely steady. It's because of you. For a moment, silence stretched between us, but it wasn't empty. It was full, of all the glances, the near touches, the quiet evenings we'd shared. All the things we hadn't put into words but had felt anyway. She shook her head slightly, her lips parting as though she wanted to argue, to remind me of the obvious, our difference in years, in experience, in the roles we were supposed to play. But no words came out. Instead, she just stood there, her hand still against my chest, her pulse racing against my own. I've tried to ignore it, I admitted, my voice rougher now. The way you make me feel. The way I look forward to hearing you laugh, or the way I catch myself thinking about you when I shouldn't. But tonight, after what you whispered, I can't keep pretending anymore. Her eyes glistened, though she blinked quickly, as if fighting back tears. You don't know what you're saying, she murmured, but the tremble in her voice gave her away. I do, I said firmly, though I kept my tone gentle. I know this is real. I know you feel it too. She inhaled sharply, her composure breaking for just a heartbeat. And then, in a voice barely audible, she confessed, I do. But I'm afraid. Her honesty hit me harder than anything else. Not the fear itself, but the courage it took for her to admit it. I squeezed her hand lightly, still pressed against my chest. So am I whispered. But maybe we don't have to be. The way she looked at me then, eyes shining, lips parted, standing closer than she ever had before, wasn't the look of a landlady, or even just a friend. It was the look of someone who had finally let down her guard and allowed herself to want. And in that moment, everything unspoken between us became undeniable. The morning after felt different. Not in a dramatic way, but in the subtle quietness of the house. The air seemed lighter, almost as though the walls themselves had been holding on to something, and now they had finally let it go. I woke earlier than usual, restless from the memory of the night before. Her embrace. Her whisper. The way her hand trembled against my chest when we both admitted what had been lingering between us for so long. None of it felt like a dream, though part of me still half expected to step out of my room and find everything back to the way it had been. But when I walked into the kitchen, there she was. She stood by the counter, humming faintly as she prepared breakfast. The sunlight filtered through the curtains, falling across her hair in golden strands. She wore something simple, just a loose shirt and soft trousers, but there was an ease about her I hadn't seen before. Less guarded. Warmer. She glanced up when she noticed me, and for a second, I thought she might look away, retreat behind the usual polite walls. But she didn't. She smiled. Small, genuine, steady. "Good morning," she said softly. I murmured it back, taking a seat at the table. She set a plate down in front of me, eggs, toast, nothing fancy, but the gesture carried a weight I couldn't ignore. It wasn't just breakfast. It was care. It was her way of saying, without words, that she wanted me here, that she wasn't pulling away. As she moved around the kitchen, I found myself watching her with new eyes. Noticing the sway of her movements, the ease in the way she handed me butter, the quiet rhythm we fell into without even trying. She didn't need to ask me to help, I just rose, reached for the cups, set them on the table, and somehow it felt natural, like we'd done this 100 times before. At one point, a strand of her hair slipped loose, falling across her face as she leaned down to set something on the table. Before I could stop myself, I reached out. My fingers brushed lightly against her temple as I tucked the hair gently behind her ear. She froze, not in shock, but in awareness. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for a moment, we just stood there, her face so close I could see the fine lines near her eyes, the softness in them that only appeared when she let herself be seen. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The silence carried more weight than words could. Finally, she smiled, small, almost shy, and whispered, "Thank you." I returned the smile, my hand lingering just a second longer near her cheek before I pulled back. And in that quiet exchange, I felt it, certainty. Whatever doubts, whatever fears had kept us circling around each other, they no longer held the same power. We ate together after that, laughing at little things, the way people do when something unspoken has finally found its place. The house no longer felt empty, and neither did we. That morning wasn't the start of a complicated story. It was the start of something simple, something honest. A new beginning. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I realized, I wasn't just living in her house anymore. I was beginning to live with her, in every way that mattered. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and share it with someone who believes in unexpected love. And if you'd like to hear more slow burn age gap romances like this, subscribe and join me for the next story.